The moment that doctor's scalpel was about to cut into my flesh, my 10-year-old grandson looked me dead in the eye and asked if I wanted to know the real reason why his father needed my kidney. Let me tell you where you're watching this from in the comments below, because what I'm about to share with you happened right here in small-town America, and it could happen to anyone, anywhere. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you'd literally give them a piece of your body to save their life, then you need to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you're going to want to follow every twisted turn of what happened next. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why some secrets should never be kept, and why sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. My name is Dorothy, though everyone calls me Dot, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, while I was tending to my tomato seedlings in the greenhouse behind my house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The greenhouse was my sanctuary, a place where I could nurture life and forget about the disappointments that had accumulated over 7 decades of living. The phone rang with that urgent tone that immediately tells you something's wrong. When you're my age, calls like that usually mean someone's sick, someone's died, or someone's in jail. I never imagined it could mean all three, in a way. My daughter-in-law Carmen's voice was shaking when I picked up. Carmen had married my son Bradley 15 years ago, and while we'd never been close, we'd maintained a polite relationship for the sake of family harmony. She was always a bit too polished for my taste. One of those women who never seemed to have a hair out of place or a genuine emotion showing on her face. She told me Bradley was in the hospital. Kidney failure. Complete, sudden, life-threatening kidney failure. The doctors said he needed a transplant immediately, and the waiting list for a donor kidney was months, maybe years long. He didn't have months. He had weeks, maybe less. I dropped the phone and sank into my old wooden chair, the one my late husband Frank had made for me 30 years ago. Bradley was my only child, my miracle baby who came to me when I was already 38 and had given up hope of ever being a mother. Frank and I had tried for so many years, through so many heartbreaks and false hopes. When Bradley finally arrived, pink and screaming and perfect, I thought my life was complete. Now my boy was dying, and I was possibly the only person who could save him. I called Carmen back within minutes. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was steady. I'd been tested for compatibility years ago when Frank needed his kidney transplant. A test that ultimately proved unnecessary when Frank passed from his heart giving out before his kidneys. I was a universal donor, O-negative, the kind of person who could give to almost anyone. If Bradley needed a kidney, I'd give him mine without hesitation. Carmen cried with relief when I told her. She said Bradley didn't want to ask me directly because he knew I'd been through so much already. Frank's death 3 years ago had hit me hard, and Bradley had watched me struggle through that grief. He didn't want to burden me with his problems. But this wasn't a burden. This was what mothers do. This was love in its purest form. I drove to Des Moines that afternoon, making the 2-hour journey in record time despite my usual cautious driving habits. The University of Iowa hospitals and clinics towered above me as I parked, a massive complex that looked more like a small city than a medical facility. Inside, the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with that underlying hospital odor that somehow manages to smell like both hope and despair at the same time. Bradley looked smaller than I remembered when I found him in the nephrology unit. My 6-foot-tall son, who had played varsity basketball in high school and still carried himself with an athlete's confidence, seemed to have shrunk into the hospital bed. His skin had a grayish pallor that scared me more than anything the doctors had told me over the phone. When he saw me, he started crying. My strong, stoic son, the man who had given the eulogy at his father's funeral without shedding a tear, broke down completely. He kept saying he was sorry, that he never wanted this to happen, that he felt like he was asking too much of me. I held his hand and told him what any mother would tell her child. There was nothing to be sorry for, and there was no such thing as asking too much. I would give him both my kidneys if the doctors would let me. Carmen stood in the corner of the room, perfectly composed as always, but I noticed she wouldn't meet my eyes directly. At the time, I attributed it to the stress of the situation. Looking back, I realize it was the first sign that something wasn't right. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of medical tests, consultations, and paperwork. The transplant team was thorough: blood tests, tissue typing, psychological evaluations, meetings with social workers and financial counselors. They wanted to make sure I understood the risks, that I was mentally and physically prepared for major surgery at my age. Every test came back perfect. I was a flawless match for Bradley, and despite being 72, I was in excellent health. Years of gardening and walking had kept my body strong, and my recent physical had shown the heart and lungs of someone 20 years younger. The doctors were amazed. Dr. Richardson, the head of the transplant team, pulled me aside after the final consultation. He was a kind man in his 50s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of bedside manner that immediately put you at ease. He explained the surgery one more time, making sure I understood that while kidney donation was generally safe, it was still major surgery with real risks. There would be pain, a long recovery period, and I'd need to be careful about my remaining kidney for the rest of my life. He also mentioned that at my age, complications were always a possibility. I told him I understood everything, and that none of it mattered. My son was dying, and I could save him. What kind of mother would I be if I didn't? Dr. Richardson smiled and patted my hand. He said he'd seen a lot of families go through this process, and the love between a parent and child never failed to move him. He told me I was giving Bradley the greatest gift one person could give another: the gift of life itself. The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. Carmen would bring their son Tyler, my 10-year-old grandson, to stay with me for the weekend before the operation. They thought it would be good for Tyler to spend time with his grandmother, and it would give Bradley and Carmen some alone time to process everything before the surgery. I was looking forward to having Tyler around. He was a bright, curious boy who reminded me so much of Bradley at that age. Always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Plus, having him there would help keep my mind off my own nerves about the surgery. That Friday evening, as I prepared my guest room for Tyler's visit, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Yes, I was scared about the surgery. Yes, I worried about the recovery. But I also felt more purposeful than I had since Frank died. I was going to save my son's life. I was going to be the hero of this story. If only I had known then that sometimes the people we're trying to save are the ones who need saving from themselves. Tyler arrived on Friday evening with a backpack full of comic books, his Nintendo Switch, and enough energy to power the entire state of Iowa. At 10 years old, he was all knees and elbows and boundless curiosity, with Bradley's dark hair and Carmen's sharp intelligence gleaming in his bright blue eyes. Carmen dropped him off with barely a goodbye, claiming she needed to get back to the hospital to be with Bradley. I found this odd. Visiting hours were over, and Bradley had been resting comfortably when I'd called that afternoon. But I didn't question it. Everyone handles stress differently, and maybe she just needed some time to herself to process everything. Tyler and I fell into an easy rhythm that weekend. Saturday morning, I made him my famous blueberry pancakes, a recipe that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. He ate 6 of them, syrup dripping down his chin, telling me stories about school and his friends and the soccer team he joined that spring. He was different from how I remembered him during family gatherings. More relaxed, more talkative. Usually, when the whole family was together, Tyler seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the adult conversations and the tension that always seemed to simmer beneath the surface when Bradley and Carmen were in the same room. Now, with just the 2 of us, he opened up in ways that surprised me. He talked about how scary it had been when his dad got sick, how he'd heard his parents arguing late at night when they thought he was asleep, how confused he was about everything that was happening. I tried to reassure him as best I could. I explained that sometimes grown-ups got sick, and that's why we had doctors and hospitals and people who loved us enough to help. I told him that after the surgery, his dad would be much better, and everything would go back to normal. Tyler looked at me with those serious blue eyes and asked if I was scared about the surgery. I admitted that I was a little nervous, but that I was more excited than scared because I was going to help his daddy get better. He nodded solemnly, then asked if it would hurt. I told him it probably would, for a little while, but that the doctors would give me medicine to help with the pain. I said that sometimes we have to go through difficult things to help the people we love. That afternoon, we worked in my garden together. Tyler was fascinated by the whole process, how you could put tiny seeds in the ground and, with enough water and sunshine and patience, they would grow into beautiful plants that could feed people. He helped me plant the last of my spring vegetables, getting dirt under his fingernails and soil streaked across his forehead. As we worked, he started asking me questions about his dad. Not medical questions, but deeper things. He wanted to know what Bradley was like as a little boy, whether he'd always wanted to be an accountant, why he and Grandpa Frank never seemed to get along very well. That last question caught me off guard. Frank had died when Tyler was only 7, so his memories of his grandfather were limited. I hadn't realized Tyler had picked up on the tension between Frank and Bradley. I tried to explain it gently. Frank had been a practical man, a farmer who believed in hard work and simple living. Bradley had always been drawn to books and numbers and the kind of analytical thinking that seemed foreign to Frank. They'd never understood each other very well, even though they'd both loved each other deeply. Tyler listened carefully, absorbing every word. Then he asked me something that made my heart ache. Do you think Dad loves me even though we don't understand each other very well either? I stopped digging and looked at this sweet, thoughtful boy. I told him that his father absolutely loved him, more than anything in the world, and that sometimes parents have trouble showing their love in ways that children understand. But that didn't mean the love wasn't there. Tyler seemed satisfied with that answer, and we went back to planting in comfortable silence. That evening, we watched movies on Netflix. Superhero films that Tyler loved and that made me feel every one of my 72 years. But I enjoyed seeing him laugh and cheer for the good guys, enjoying his enthusiasm even when the plot made no sense to me. During one particularly loud action sequence, Tyler turned to me and said something that I didn't think much of at the time, but that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. "Grandma," he said, "do you think people should tell the truth even if it might hurt someone they love?" It was such a mature question for a 10-year-old, and I could tell he'd been thinking about it seriously. I told him that honesty was always important, but that sometimes the way we tell the truth mattered as much as the truth itself. I said that if you loved someone, you try to find ways to be honest that help them rather than hurt them. He nodded and went back to watching the movie, but I noticed he seemed more subdued for the rest of the evening. Sunday was quieter. We went to church together at the little Methodist congregation I'd attended for 40 years. Tyler sat beside me in the pew, unusually still and attentive during the service. When Pastor Williams asked for prayers for those facing medical challenges, I felt Tyler's small hand slip into mine and squeeze tight. After church, several people approached us to say they'd be praying for Bradley and for me during the surgery. Mrs. Henderson, who taught Sunday school when Bradley was young, told Tyler what a brave grandmother he had. She said not every family was lucky enough to have someone willing to make such a sacrifice. Tyler thanked her politely, but I noticed he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He stayed close to my side as we made our way to the car, and he was quiet during the drive home. That afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, Tyler sat at my kitchen table with his homework spread out in front of him. But instead of working on his math problems, he kept staring out the window toward my garden, his pencil tapping against the table in a nervous rhythm. I asked him if something was bothering him, if he was worried about the surgery tomorrow. He looked up at me with an expression that seemed far too old for his 10-year-old face. "Grandma," he said slowly, "what if someone you loved was doing something wrong, but they didn't know it was wrong because someone else was lying to them?" I set down the wooden spoon I was using to stir the soup and turned to face him fully. This was clearly something that had been weighing on his mind. I told him that lying was always wrong, and that if someone was being lied to, especially about something important, then the right thing to do was to tell them the truth. But I also said that sometimes these situations were complicated, and it might be best to talk to a grown-up who could help figure out the best way to handle it. Tyler nodded, but he still looked troubled. He went back to his homework, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it. That night, after Tyler had gone to bed, I found myself lying awake thinking about our conversations over the weekend. There had been something in his questions, something in his demeanor, that suggested he was carrying a burden too heavy for a child his age. I wondered if he was just worried about the surgery, if seeing his father so sick had scared him more than he was letting on. Or maybe the arguments between his parents that he'd mentioned had been worse than I'd realized. I made a mental note to talk to Bradley and Carmen about it after the surgery, when everyone was feeling less stressed and more able to focus on Tyler's emotional needs. I had no idea that Tyler already knew exactly what his emotional needs were, and that he was struggling with a secret that would change everything. Monday morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of March weather that makes you wonder if spring will ever really arrive. I woke up at 5, 2 hours before my alarm, my stomach churning with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. In a few hours, I would be lying on an operating table, giving a piece of myself to save my son's life. Tyler was still asleep in the guest room when I got up. I'd planned to wake him early so we could have breakfast together before Carmen came to pick him up, but when I peeked into his room, he looked so peaceful that I decided to let him sleep a little longer. I made myself a light breakfast, the last food I'd be allowed before surgery, and sat in my kitchen watching the rain streak down the windows. Everything felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. In my 72 years, I'd never had major surgery. I'd been blessed with good health, rarely even catching colds. The idea of being cut open, of having an organ removed from my body, was both terrifying and strangely abstract. But every time the fear started to overwhelm me, I thought about Bradley lying in that hospital bed, his skin that awful grayish color, his body slowly shutting down. My fear seemed small compared to that. Tyler wandered into the kitchen around 7, his hair sticking up in all directions and his Superman pajamas wrinkled from sleep. He climbed onto the chair across from me and rubbed his eyes, looking younger than his 10 years in the soft morning light. I'd prepared his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into triangles, the way I'd done for Bradley when he was Tyler's age. Tyler ate slowly, unusually quiet for a boy who normally chatted nonstop in the mornings. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching across the table to smooth down his unruly hair. He looked up at me with those serious blue eyes. "Grandma, are you really sure you want to do this surgery?" The question surprised me. "Of course I'm sure, honey. Your dad needs help, and I can help him. Why would you ask that?" Tyler stared down at his eggs, pushing them around on his plate with his fork. "It just seems like maybe there might be other ways to help him." I smiled gently. "Well, the doctors have looked at all the options, and this is really the best way. Don't worry, I'm going to be just fine, and so is your dad." Tyler nodded, but he still looked troubled. He finished his breakfast in silence while I went upstairs to shower and get dressed. When I came back down, he was sitting on the living room couch, staring at the framed family photos on the side table. Carmen arrived at 8:30, looking perfectly put together despite the early hour and the stress of the situation. She wore a crisp white blouse and dark slacks, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup flawless. I'd always envied her ability to look so composed no matter what was happening around her. "How are you feeling, Dot?" she asked, giving me a brief hug that felt more dutiful than affectionate. "Ready," I told her, and I meant it. "How's Bradley this morning?" "Nervous, but grateful. He knows what a gift you're giving him." Carmen's voice was steady, but I noticed she wasn't quite meeting my eyes again. "Tyler, get your things. We need to get to the hospital." Tyler gathered his backpack and came to say goodbye to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist in a fierce hug, holding on longer than usual. "I love you, Grandma," he whispered against my shoulder. "I love you too, sweetheart. I'll see you soon, okay? After the surgery, when I'm feeling better, maybe you can come stay with me again while I'm recovering." Tyler pulled back and looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. For a moment, he looked like he was about to say something important. His mouth opened, then closed again. He glanced at his mother, who was checking her phone and not paying attention to us. "Grandma," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler, come on," Carmen interrupted, looking up from her phone. "We need to go. Dot, I'll drive you to the hospital. Are you ready?" I nodded, grabbing my small overnight bag and the paperwork the hospital had given me. As we walked to Carmen's SUV, I noticed Tyler lagging behind, his steps slower than usual. In the car, he stared out the window at the passing Iowa countryside, his small hands clenched into fists in his lap. The drive to Des Moines took just over 2 hours. Carmen made small talk, asking about Tyler's weekend, commenting on the weather, discussing the recovery timeline the doctors had outlined. But there was something forced about her conversation, like she was working hard to fill the silence. Tyler said almost nothing during the entire drive. When I asked him if he was excited to see his dad, he just nodded and went back to staring out the window. We arrived at the hospital at 11, with surgery scheduled for 2 o'clock. Carmen parked in the visitor garage, and we made our way through the maze of corridors to the preoperative area. The familiar hospital smells hit me immediately, that mixture of antiseptic and anxiety that seemed to permeate every inch of the building. Bradley was waiting for us in a pre-op room, already wearing a hospital gown and connected to various monitors. He looked better than he had the previous week. Some of his color had returned, and he seemed more alert. The medical team had been working hard to stabilize him for surgery. When Tyler saw his father, he ran to his bedside and carefully climbed up to give him a hug. Bradley held his son close, and for a moment, I saw the love and tenderness that I knew existed between them, even if it wasn't always easy for them to express. "How's my brave boy?" Bradley asked, ruffling Tyler's hair. "I'm okay, Dad. Are you scared?" Bradley glanced at me, then back at Tyler. A little bit. But I'm mostly grateful. Grandma is doing something very special for us, and after today, I'm going to be healthy again. We'll be able to play soccer in the backyard, and I'll have energy to take you camping this summer like we talked about. Tyler nodded, but I noticed he didn't seem as excited about these prospects as a normal 10-year-old would be. If anything, he looked more distressed. A nurse came in to start my fall and begin the preoperative preparations. As she worked, explaining each step of the process, I watched Tyler standing beside his father's bed. The boy's face was a mask of internal conflict, like he was fighting some enormous battle inside his head. Carmen sat in the corner chair, scrolling through her phone and occasionally looking up to make appropriate comments. She seemed oddly detached for someone whose husband was about to receive a life-saving organ transplant. Dr. Richardson appeared around 1 o'clock to review the final details with both Bradley and me. He explained the timeline. My surgery would begin at 2, and should take about 3 hours. Bradley's surgery would start an hour later, once my kidney had been removed and prepared. If everything went smoothly, we'd both be in recovery by evening. The anesthesiologist came in to introduce himself and explain what I could expect. A surgical nurse reviewed the post-operative care instructions. Everyone was professional, thorough, and reassuring. But as 2 o'clock approached, I noticed Tyler becoming more and more agitated. He kept looking back and forth between his parents and me, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Several times, he started to speak, then stopped himself. Finally, it was time. An orderly arrived with a wheelchair to take me to the operating room. Bradley took my hand and squeezed it tight, tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't even begin to thank you for this. I know what you're giving up for me, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it." I smiled and kissed his forehead. "You're my son. You're already worthy of everything I have to give." Carmen stood up and gave me another one of her dutiful hugs. "Thank you, Dot. This means everything to our family." Tyler was the last to say goodbye. He approached my wheelchair slowly, his face pale and his eyes wide. He leaned down to hug me, and I felt his small body trembling. "Grandma," he whispered urgently in my ear, so quietly that no one else could hear. "There's something I need to tell you. Something about Dad and why he really needs your kidney." But before he could continue, Carmen was there, gently pulling him away. "Say goodbye quickly, Tyler. Grandma needs to go to surgery now." I looked at Tyler's face, seeing the desperation there, the urgent need to communicate something important. But the orderly was already starting to wheel me toward the door. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching back to take his hand. Tyler looked at his mother, then at his father, then back at me. His mouth opened and closed, the words clearly struggling to come out. I love you, Grandma. Please be careful." And then they were wheeling me away, down the long corridor toward the operating room, leaving my family behind. But Tyler's trembling hands and desperate eyes stayed with me, even as the preoperative sedatives began to take effect. I had no idea that in less than an hour, that same 10-year-old boy would find the courage to say the words that would change everything. The operating room was exactly what you'd expect, blindingly white, filled with monitors and machines that beeped and hummed with technological precision. The surgical team moved around me with practiced efficiency, checking equipment and reviewing procedures in voices too low for me to understand. Dr. Richardson appeared beside me, masked and gowned, his kind eyes visible above the blue surgical mask. He took my hand and squeezed it gently. "How are you feeling, Dot?" "Ready," I told him, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The anesthesiologist approached with a syringe. "This is going to make you feel very relaxed," he said in a soothing voice. "Just count backward from 10 for me." I took a deep breath, thinking about Bradley lying in another room nearby, waiting for the kidney that would save his life. I thought about Tyler's worried face, about Carmen's strange detachment, about the weekend Tyler and I had spent together planting seeds in my garden. 10, I began, feeling the medication flow through my foreline. 9, 8, 7. The world started to fade around the edges, becoming soft and fuzzy like looking through gauze. 6, 5. I was almost under when I heard a commotion outside the operating room. Voices raised in urgent conversation, though I couldn't make out the words through the heavy doors. 4. The sedative was pulling me deeper, but some part of my mind was still alert, still listening to the muffled sounds from the corridor. 3. The operating room doors burst open. Dr. Richardson looked up sharply, clearly annoyed at the interruption. A nurse rushed in, her face flushed and her breathing rapid. "Doctor, I'm sorry, but there's a situation with the family. The patient's son, the little boy, is saying something that, well, you need to hear this before we proceed." Dr. Richardson frowned. "Can't this wait? We're ready to begin." "Sir, I really think you should hear what the child is saying. It's about the patient's condition, about why he needs the transplant." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Dr. Richardson looked down at me, noting that while I was heavily sedated, I wasn't completely unconscious yet. "Bring the boy in," he said finally. And that's when my world exploded. Tyler was led into the operating room by a nurse, his face streaked with tears and his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. Carmen followed close behind, her perfect composure finally cracked, her face a mask of panic and barely controlled rage. "Tyler, stop this right now," Carmen hissed under her breath. "Get back to your father's room immediately." But Tyler stood his ground, looking directly at me lying on the operating table. Even through the haze of medication, I could see the determination in his young face, the courage it was taking for him to speak up against the adults in his life. "Grandma," he said, his voice shaking but clear, "I need to tell you something about Dad. About why he really needs your kidney." Dr. Richardson stepped closer to Tyler, his medical training kicking in despite the unusual circumstances. "What is it, son? What do you need to tell your grandmother?" Tyler looked at his mother, who was shaking her head frantically, her eyes wide with what I now realize was terror. Then he looked back at me, and I saw him make the decision that would change all our lives. "My dad doesn't just have kidney failure," Tyler said, his voice getting stronger with each word. "He has kidney failure because he's been using drugs. Hard drugs. For years." The operating room went completely silent. Even the machines seemed to pause their beeping. "Tyler." Carmen's voice was sharp with panic. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a child, you don't understand." "I'm not a child about this," Tyler said, turning to face his mother with a maturity that broke my heart. "I've seen the needles, Mom. I've seen Dad when he thinks I'm asleep. I've heard you fighting about it. I've watched him get sicker and sicker, and you keep telling everyone it's just stress from work." Dr. Richardson looked from Tyler to Carmen, his expression growing more serious by the second. "Mrs. Patterson, is this true?" Carmen's perfect facade was completely shattered now. Her face was red, her hands shaking, her voice high and desperate. "He's just confused. Bradley has been under so much stress, and Tyler has seen him tired and sick, but that doesn't mean—" "Mom, stop lying." Tyler's voice cracked with emotion. "Grandma deserves to know the truth before she gives Dad her kidney. She deserves to know that Dad might just destroy it too." The full impact of what Tyler was saying hit me like a physical blow, even through the medication clouding my thoughts. Bradley, my son, my miracle baby, was a drug addict. He'd destroyed his own kidneys with drugs, and now Carmen wanted me to give him mine, knowing he might destroy it too. Dr. Richardson was already moving, checking my adjusting the medications. "We need to postpone this surgery immediately," he said to the surgical team. "Mrs. Davidson, can you hear me? We're going to let you wake up. There are some things we need to discuss before we proceed." Through the fog of sedation, I managed to nod. Tyler approached my bedside, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he whispered. "I'm sorry I waited so long to tell you. I was scared, and I didn't want Dad to die, but I couldn't let you do this without knowing the truth." Carmen was backing toward the door, her face a mixture of rage and defeat. "You've ruined everything," she hissed at Tyler. "Everything we've worked for, everything we've tried to build. Your father is going to die because of your big mouth." And that's when Tyler said the words that will haunt me for the rest of my life. "Dad might die anyway, Mom. But at least now Grandma won't die too when she finds out you've been planning to take her kidney and her money." The room erupted into chaos. Carmen lunged toward Tyler, screaming that he was lying, that he didn't understand anything, that he was destroying their family. Dr. Richardson was shouting for security while simultaneously trying to monitor my vital signs as the medications began to wear off and the full emotional impact of Tyler's revelations hit me. But through it all, I kept my eyes on my grandson's face. This brave, 10-year-old boy who had found the courage to speak truth to power, who had risked his mother's wrath and his father's potential death to protect me from a betrayal so deep I still couldn't fully comprehend it. As security guards escorted Carmen from the operating room and Dr. Richardson worked to fully reverse my anesthesia, I realized that Tyler had just saved my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. The surgery was cancelled. The transplant was postponed indefinitely. And my family, as I had known it, was destroyed forever. But Tyler had given me something far more valuable than any of those things. He had given me the truth. If you've ever had someone you trusted completely betray you at the deepest level, then you know the shock I was feeling as that anesthesia wore off. But if you're still watching, if you want to know what happened next, then stay with me. Because this story is far from over. The thumbnail moment was behind us, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The recovery room where they took me after cancelling the surgery felt like purgatory. I lay there for what seemed like hours, the medications slowly leaving my system while my mind tried to process what Tyler had revealed. Nurses checked on me regularly, their voices gentle and professional, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. Hospital staff had witnessed some dramatic family confrontations over the years, but I suspected this one was memorable even by their standards. Dr. Richardson came to see me around 5 o'clock, after I was fully alert and my vital signs had stabilized. He pulled up a chair beside my bed and sat down with the deliberate movements of someone preparing to have a very serious conversation. He began, using my first name with the familiarity that comes from shared crisis. We need to talk about what happened in there today. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. Tyler's accusations about his father's drug use, if they're true, it changes everything about this transplant. We can't proceed without a full investigation into Bradley's medical history and current condition. What kind of drugs? I finally managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Richardson hesitated. Based on what Tyler described, the needles, the progressive kidney failure, the attempts to hide the real cause, it sounds like heroin or another opioid. Prolonged use can cause exactly the kind of kidney damage we've been treating in Bradley. The word heroin hit me like a physical blow. Heroin was something that happened to other people's children, to kids from broken homes or bad neighborhoods. Not to my Bradley, who had gone to college, who had a good job, who lived in a nice suburban house with a manicured lawn and a 2-car garage. There's something else, Dr. Richardson continued gently. Tyler mentioned something about money. About Carmen having financial motives for this transplant. Do you know what he might have meant? I shook my head, but even as I did, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed began falling into place. Carmen's insistence that I come to Des Moines immediately. Her strange detachment during the pre-surgical consultations. The way she'd rushed Tyler away every time he seemed about to say something important. I need to think, I told Dr. Richardson. I need to understand what's really been happening. He nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. We've moved Bradley to a secure unit while we sort this out. His condition is stable for now, but He paused, choosing his words carefully. If Tyler is right about the drug use, Bradley is going to need treatment that goes far beyond a kidney transplant. And frankly, until he's clean and has been clean for a significant period, most transplant programs wouldn't consider him a viable candidate anyway. After Dr. Richardson left, I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles and thinking about signs I should have seen. Bradley's weight loss over the past year, which Carmen had attributed to stress at work. His increasingly erratic behavior during family gatherings. The way he'd seemed distant and distracted during our phone calls. The financial problems I'd suspected but never asked about directly. And then there was Frank's life insurance money. When Frank died 3 years ago, his life insurance policy had paid out $200,000. I'd used some of it to pay for his funeral and to make some long overdue repairs on the house, but the rest, nearly $160,000, was sitting in a savings account. I'd been planning to leave it to Bradley when I died, but lately, Carmen had been dropping hints about how helpful it would be if I could invest some of it in their future now, while they were young enough to really benefit from it. At the time, I'd thought she was talking about maybe helping with Tyler's college fund or a down payment on a bigger house. Now I wondered if she'd been talking about something else entirely. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Tyler peeked around the doorframe, his eyes red from crying but his jaw set with determination. "Can I come in, Grandma?" I held out my arms to him, and he ran to my bedside, climbing up into the chair Dr. Richardson had vacated. For a few minutes, we just held each other, this brave little boy and his grandmother who had been saved from making the biggest mistake of her life. Are you mad at me? Tyler asked finally, his voice muffled against my shoulder. Mad at you? Oh, sweetheart, no. You saved me today. You were the only one brave enough to tell me the truth. Tyler pulled back to look at me, and I was struck again by how old his eyes looked in his young face. I've been wanting to tell someone for so long, but I was scared. Dad made me promise not to tell anyone about his medicine, and Mom said it would destroy our family if people found out. How long have you known? Tyler was quiet for a moment, thinking. I first saw the needles about 2 years ago, in Dad's desk drawer when I was looking for batteries. When I asked him about them, he said they were medicine for his back pain from when he hurt it playing basketball. He made me promise not to tell Mom because he said she worried too much. My heart ached thinking about this child carrying such a heavy secret for so long. But then I started noticing other things, Tyler continued. Dad would disappear for hours and come back acting weird and sleepy. Sometimes he'd be really happy and energetic, and other times he'd be angry and mean. And I heard him and Mom fighting about money all the time. What kind of fights about money? Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. Mom said they were going to lose the house if Dad didn't get help. Dad said he was trying, but that everything was expensive and he needed more time. And then Mom said maybe it was time to ask you for help, and Dad got really angry and said he wasn't going to beg his mother for money. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. Carmen hadn't just been hiding Bradley's addiction. She'd been planning to use me to solve their financial problems while I was emotionally vulnerable and desperate to save my son. Tyler, did you hear your parents talking about my kidney specifically? About the transplant? Tyler nodded reluctantly. About 3 weeks ago, after Dad got really sick and had to go to the hospital. Mom was on the phone with someone, I think maybe Dad's doctor, and she was asking about transplant lists and how long people had to wait. Then she called you. He paused, looking down at his hands. But the next day, I heard her on the phone with someone else, talking about how if you gave Dad your kidney, you'd probably want to help us with other things too. She said old people who'd been through something traumatic like surgery often felt, what was the word, obligated to help their families more. The word obligated hit me like a slap. Carmen hadn't just been planning to take my kidney. She'd been planning to manipulate my post-surgical gratitude and vulnerability to get her hands on Frank's life insurance money. And then yesterday, Tyler continued, his voice barely audible now, I heard Dad and Mom fighting again. Dad said he was scared about taking your kidney because what if the drugs had messed him up so bad that it wouldn't work anyway? And Mom said that wasn't his problem. Once he had your kidney, they could figure out the rest later. I felt sick. Not just emotionally, but physically sick at the realization of how close I'd come to being manipulated and used by my own family. Tyler climbed up onto the hospital bed beside me and curled up against my side. I kept trying to find a way to tell you without getting Dad in trouble, but then this morning when I saw you getting ready for surgery, I knew I couldn't let you do it without knowing the truth. I held him close, this precious boy who'd had more courage than any of the adults in his life. What's going to happen now, Grandma? It was a good question, and I didn't have an easy answer. Bradley was still my son, and despite everything, I still loved him. But loving someone doesn't mean enabling their self-destruction or allowing yourself to be manipulated and used. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I know that the truth is always better than lies, even when the truth is hard. As if summoned by our conversation, Carmen appeared in the doorway. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her clothes wrinkled. But more than that, the mask she'd worn for so long had finally slipped completely away, revealing something desperate and ugly underneath. Tyler, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, you need to come with me right now. Tyler pressed closer to my side. I want to stay with Grandma. Carmen stepped into the room, her hands clenched into fists. You've done enough damage for one day. Your father is devastated. The doctors are asking all kinds of questions, and it's all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about things you don't understand. He understands more than you think, I said quietly, my arm tightening protectively around Tyler. And he did the right thing. Carmen's composure snapped completely. The right thing? He's destroyed everything. Bradley needed that kidney, and now because of Tyler's big mouth, he's not going to get it. My husband is going to die, and it's going to be my son's fault. The venom in her voice as she spoke to Tyler made my blood run cold. This woman was blaming a 10-year-old child for her husband's addiction and her own deception. "Your husband is going to die because he's been using heroin," I said, my voice steady despite my rage. "Tyler didn't cause that. You and Bradley caused that by lying about it and trying to manipulate me into enabling it." Carmen's face went white, then red. "We weren't manipulating anyone. We were trying to save Bradley's life. And we hoped." She stopped, realizing she was about to admit to something that would make things even worse for her. "You hoped that after I gave Bradley my kidney, I'd be so invested in his recovery that I'd give you Frank's insurance money to help with the medical bills and whatever other debts Bradley's addiction has created," I finished for her. The look on Carmen's face told me I'd guessed correctly. "How much does he owe?" I asked quietly. Carmen's shoulders sagged in defeat. 60,000. Maybe 70. I don't know exactly. Tyler looked up at me with wide eyes. He'd known his parents were in financial trouble, but I don't think he'd understood the scope of it. "And you thought if I gave Bradley my kidney, I'd feel obligated to pay his drug debts too?" Carmen didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. I looked at this woman who'd married my son 15 years ago, who'd been the mother of my only grandchild, who I tried so hard to love despite never really connecting with her. Now I understood why we'd never connected. She'd been evaluating me as a resource to be managed, not a family member to be loved. "Carmen," I said finally, "I want you to leave. Take your things and go home." "You can't make me leave. This is my family." "Tyler is your family. Bradley is your family. But I'm not your ATM, and I'm not going to be your victim anymore." Carmen looked like she wanted to say something else, something that would probably make this situation even worse than it already was. But then Tyler spoke up, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Mom, just go. Please. Grandma's right, and you know she's right. Dad needs help, but not the kind of help that comes from lies." Carmen stared at her son for a long moment, and I saw something die in her eyes. Then she turned and walked out without another word. Tyler and I sat in silence for a while after she left. Finally, he looked up at me with those serious blue eyes. "Grandma, are you still going to try to help Dad?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because I didn't have a good answer. Bradley was still my son, and he was still sick. Maybe sicker than I'd realized. But helping him now would require something very different from what I'd been prepared to do that morning. "I'm going to try to help him get the help he really needs," I told Tyler. "But that's going to look very different from what your mom wanted me to do." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Does that mean you're not going to give him your kidney?" "Not until he's clean, and stays clean for a long time. And maybe not even then. There are other people who need kidneys too, people who didn't destroy their own through drug use." I expected Tyler to be upset by this, to argue that his father deserved my help despite everything. Instead, he surprised me. "I think that's fair," he said quietly. "Dad made choices that hurt his kidneys. Other people got sick without making any choices at all." The wisdom of this child continued to amaze me. At 10 years old, he understood justice and consequences better than most adults. But as we sat there in that hospital room, I realized that Tyler's revelations had given me more than just the truth about Bradley's condition. They'd given me power, the power to choose how I responded to this betrayal, the power to decide what kind of help I was willing to offer and what kind I wasn't. Carmen and Bradley had seen me as an easy mark, a lonely old widow who could be manipulated through love and guilt. They'd underestimated both my intelligence and my grandson's courage. Now it was time for them to learn that Dorothy Davidson wasn't nearly as helpless as they'd assumed. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest and follow up with my regular doctor within the week. The physical toll of the cancelled surgery was minimal, some soreness from the fall, fatigue from the stress and medications, but the emotional toll was devastating. Tyler had stayed with me at the hospital both nights, sleeping in the reclining chair beside my bed. The nursing staff had bent the rules to allow it, recognizing that this child had been through something traumatic and needed the stability of being with someone who loved him unconditionally. Carmen had tried to visit several times, but I'd refused to see her. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and more importantly, I wanted to talk to Bradley first. I needed to hear from my son's own mouth what Tyler had risked so much to tell me. On Wednesday morning, Tyler and I took a taxi to Bradley's room in the nephrology unit. He'd been moved back there after the security incident in the OR, and according to Dr. Richardson, He was stable but confused and upset about what had happened. Bradley was sitting up in bed when we arrived, looking better physically than he had in weeks. His color had improved, and some of the bloating from kidney dysfunction had gone down with the intensive treatment he'd been receiving. But his eyes looked haunted. When he saw Tyler and me enter the room, he started crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted you to find out at all." I pulled up a chair beside his bed while Tyler hung back near the door, uncertain of his reception. Bradley noticed his son's hesitation and held out his hand. "Tyler, come here, buddy. You did the right thing. I'm not angry with you for telling the truth." Tyler approached cautiously and took his father's hand. "Are you sure, Dad? Mom said I ruined everything." Bradley's face darkened at the mention of Carmen. "Your mom is upset and scared, but that doesn't make what you did wrong. You protected Grandma from something that could have hurt her badly. That was brave, and I'm proud of you." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. "Mom, can we talk? Just the two of us?" I nodded and asked Tyler to wait in the hallway for a few minutes. He left reluctantly, clearly worried about what might happen between his father and me. Once we were alone, Bradley seemed to shrink back into his hospital bed, suddenly looking younger than his 45 years. "How long?" I asked simply. He knew what I meant. 3 years. It started after Dad died. The timeline hit me like a punch to the gut. Frank had died 3 years ago, and I'd been so consumed with my own grief that I'd missed the signs that my son was self-destructing. It didn't start the way you probably think it did," Bradley continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hurt my back at work about 6 months after Dad's funeral. The doctor gave me prescription painkillers, and they helped with more than just the physical pain. They helped with the grief, the guilt about how things were between Dad and me, the pressure I was feeling at work." I remembered that back injury. Bradley had mentioned it during a phone call, said he'd pulled something while moving boxes in his office. At the time, it had seemed like such a minor thing. When the prescription ran out, I asked for more. When that doctor wouldn't give me more, I found another doctor. When that became too expensive and complicated, someone told me that heroin was cheaper and easier to get. The word heroin still sounded surreal coming from my son's mouth. This was Bradley, who had been valedictorian of his high school class, who had never even gotten a speeding ticket. "I told myself it was temporary," he continued. "Just until I could get my head together, until I could deal with Dad being gone and figure out how to move forward. But it wasn't temporary. And Carmen knew." Bradley's face twisted with guilt and shame. "She found out about 6 months ago. She was furious, threatened to leave me, take Tyler, expose everything. But then my kidneys started failing, and she said maybe this was a sign. Maybe this was my rock bottom, and we could use it to get me clean and save our family. By lying to me and manipulating me into giving you my kidney." "I didn't want to do it that way," Bradley said quickly. "I told her we should just tell you the truth, ask for help with treatment, maybe ask for some financial help to get caught up on bills while I was in rehab. But Carmen said you'd never help an addict, that you'd be disgusted and disappointed and probably cut us off completely." The irony was crushing. Carmen had been so afraid that I'd abandon Bradley if I knew the truth that she'd orchestrated an elaborate deception that had actually guaranteed I'd feel betrayed and abandoned. "Bradley," I said carefully, "did Carmen really think that after I gave you my kidney, I'd be more willing to help financially?" My son's face flushed red with shame. She thought that if you were invested in my recovery, if you'd already made a sacrifice for me, you'd want to protect that investment. She thought you'd see helping us financially as protecting your kidney." The coldness of the calculation took my breath away. Carmen hadn't just been willing to risk my life with unnecessary surgery. She'd been planning to manipulate my post-surgical emotional state to extract money from me. "How much do you owe?" "For the drugs?" "About $30,000. But with the medical bills, the mortgage payments we've missed, the credit cards." His voice trailed off. "How much total, Bradley?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he whispered, "Maybe 90,000. Maybe more." I sat back in my chair, stunned. $90,000. More than half of Frank's life insurance money. And Carmen thought that if I gave you my kidney, I'd pay all of that. She thought, she hoped. Bradley couldn't finish the sentence. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Beneath the kidney failure and the drug use and the shame, I could still see traces of the little boy who used to help me plant flowers in the garden, who used to read books under the apple tree in our backyard, who used to tell me he wanted to be just like his dad when he grew up. That little boy hadn't wanted to become an addict any more than I'd wanted to become a widow. Life had thrown both of us curveballs that we'd handled badly. But there was a difference between handling life badly and deliberately manipulating the people who loved you. Bradley, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. He nodded eagerly, desperate to rebuild some trust between us. If Tyler hadn't spoken up, if the surgery had gone through, would you have told me the real reason you needed the kidney? Bradley stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the answer. Finally, he shook his head. I don't think so. I was scared that if you knew, you'd hate me. I was scared that if I disappointed you the way I disappointed Dad, I'd lose you too. So you would have let me give you my kidney under false pretenses, let me believe I was helping my son through a medical crisis, when really I was enabling his drug addiction. Mom, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Bradley. And worse, you would have let Carmen use my emotional investment in your recovery to manipulate me out of your grandfather's life insurance money. Bradley's face crumpled. I didn't know about that part until yesterday. Carmen told me her plan after Tyler. After everything came out. I was horrified, Mom. I swear to you, I didn't know she was planning to ask you for money. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But the part of me that had been betrayed, the part that had come within minutes of unnecessary surgery based on lies, wasn't sure it mattered whether Bradley had known about Carmen's financial plans or not. Tyler knocked on the door and peeked his head in. Is it okay if I come back in? I motioned for him to join us. He climbed up into the chair beside me, and I put my arm around him, drawing comfort from his solid, honest presence. Dad, Tyler said quietly, are you going to get help? Real help, not just a kidney. Bradley looked at his son with tears in his eyes. I want to, buddy. I want to more than anything. But it's not easy, and it takes time, and it costs money we don't have. What if Grandma helped with the money? Tyler asked, looking back and forth between us. It was the question hanging over all of us. Bradley needed help. Real help, professional help. But after everything that had happened, could I trust him with that help? Could I trust that it wouldn't just enable more lies and manipulation? Tyler, I said carefully, what do you think would be fair? Tyler considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. I think Dad should have to prove he really wants to get better before anyone helps him. And I think he should have to tell the truth about everything, not just the drug part. Bradley looked confused. What do you mean, not just the drug part? Tyler looked at me, then back at his father. Dad, tell Grandma about the other things you took. My heart sank. There was more. What other things? Bradley asked, but his face had gone pale. Tyler's voice was barely audible. The jewelry box. Grandpa's watch. The silver candlesticks from Grandma's dining room. The room went completely silent. I stared at my son, pieces of another puzzle falling into place. Frank's watch, which had belonged to his father and grandfather before him, had disappeared from my bedroom dresser about 6 months ago. I'd searched everywhere for it, thinking I'd misplaced it. The silver candlesticks that had been my grandmother's had vanished around the same time, along with a jewelry box that had held my mother's rings. I'd thought I was losing my mind, forgetting where I'd put things. I'd even worried that I might be developing dementia. Bradley, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, did you steal from me? My son couldn't meet my eyes. I was desperate, Mom. The dealers don't take credit cards, and I'd already spent everything we had. I told myself I'd buy everything back as soon as I got clean, as soon as I could get my life together. You stole your father's watch. The watch his grandfather carried in World War I. I know. I know how terrible that is. I've felt sick about it every day since. Where is it now? Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. I sold it. I sold all of it. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so incredibly sorry. I sat there holding Tyler, looking at my son who had stolen from me, lied to me, and allowed his wife to manipulate me into nearly unnecessary surgery, and I realized that the Bradley I'd raised was gone. This man in the hospital bed was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. But Tyler was still the boy I'd fallen in love with that first time I held him as a baby. Tyler was still honest and brave and true. And Tyler needed me to make smart decisions, not just emotional ones. Bradley, I said finally, I'm going to help you. But not the way you and Carmen wanted me to. Hope flickered in his eyes. I'm going to pay for 90 days of inpatient treatment at a facility of my choosing. I'm going to make sure Tyler has a safe place to live while you're getting help. And I'm going to cover the cost of family counseling for all of us once you're clean. Mom, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise. I held up my hand to stop him. I'm not finished. After those 90 days, you're on your own financially. I won't pay your drug debts. I won't pay your mortgage or your credit cards or any other bills that your addiction created. If you can't stay clean, if you relapse, if you lie to me again about anything, I'm done. Permanently. Bradley nodded eagerly. I understand. That's fair. That's more than fair. And Bradley, Carmen will have no access to any of this help. She made her choice when she decided to manipulate and lie to me. I'll help you, and I'll help Tyler, but I'm done with her forever. The hope in Bradley's eyes dimmed slightly. Mom, she's my wife. She's Tyler's mother. She's also the woman who was willing to risk my life and manipulate my grief to steal from me. I'll be civil to her when necessary for Tyler's sake, but she will never again be welcome in my home or my life. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything I'd learned over the past few days. Tyler, are you ready to go home with me while your dad gets better? Tyler looked at his father with love and sadness and something that might have been relief. Will you really get better this time, Dad? Bradley took his son's hand and squeezed it tight. I'm going to try harder than I've ever tried anything in my life, buddy. I promise. Tyler nodded solemnly, then turned to me. I'm ready, Grandma. As we left that hospital room, I realized that Tyler's courage hadn't just saved me from making a terrible mistake. It had given me the power to help my son in a way that might actually work, rather than enabling his destruction. But Carmen had made her bed, and now she was going to have to lie in it. And if she thought Dorothy Davidson was going to go quietly into that good night, she was about to learn just how wrong she could be. Tyler and I drove back to Cedar Falls in silence, both of us processing everything that had happened over the past few days. My grandson sat beside me in the passenger seat, looking smaller and more fragile than usual, his hands folded carefully in his lap and his eyes fixed on the Iowa countryside rolling past. It wasn't until we were pulling into my driveway that the full weight of our new reality hit me. Tyler was going to be living with me for at least the next 3 months while Bradley was in treatment. This brave little boy who had saved me from the biggest mistake of my life was now my responsibility. The thought should have terrified me. I was 72 years old, set in my ways, accustomed to the quiet rhythms of living alone. I hadn't raised a child in decades, and Tyler was dealing with trauma that I barely understood myself. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. That first week, we figured out our routines together. Tyler needed to finish out his school year, so every morning I drove him to his elementary school in Des Moines. A 2-hour round trip that left me exhausted but gave me time to think. In the afternoons, we worked together in my garden, Tyler's questions and observations bringing new life to tasks I'd been doing alone for too long. Carmen called repeatedly during those first few days. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and more importantly, Tyler wasn't ready either. Every time her name appeared on my caller ID, I watched my grandson tense up, his small body bracing for conflict. Finally, on Friday evening, she showed up at my front door. I was expecting her, had been preparing for this confrontation all week. Tyler was upstairs doing homework when I heard her car in the driveway. Through the front window, I watched her sit in her SUV for several minutes, gathering courage or maybe just deciding what approach to take with me. When she finally knocked, I opened the door before she could knock a second time. Carmen looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a woman who'd been sleeping badly and eating poorly. Good. She said, her voice carefully controlled, we need to talk. No, we don't. Tyler is fine, he's safe, and he's staying with me until Bradley gets out of treatment. That's all you need to know. I started to close the door, but Carmen put her hand against it, stopping me. Please. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. But I'm Tyler's mother, and I love him. I need to see him. Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider and let her in. But I didn't invite her to sit down. Carmen looked around my living room, taking in the family photos on the mantelpiece, the comfortable furniture Frank and I had chosen together 40 years ago, the evidence of a life built on stability and honesty. Everything her own home had been lacking. "Where's Tyler?" she asked. "Upstairs. And he's going to stay upstairs until we finish this conversation." Carmen's composure finally cracked slightly. Please. I know what I did was wrong, but... Do you?" I interrupted. "Do you really know what you did? Because I'm not sure you do." Carmen looked confused, which made me angry all over again. How could someone be so manipulative and yet so clueless about the impact of her actions? "You weren't just lying to me about Bradley's condition," I continued. "You were planning to use my post-surgical vulnerability to manipulate me out of Frank's life insurance money. You were willing to risk my life with unnecessary surgery to solve financial problems that you and Bradley created through his drug addiction. And worse than any of that, you were teaching Tyler that it was okay to lie to people who love you if it gets you what you want." "I wasn't teaching Tyler anything," Carmen said defensively. "I was trying to protect him from his father's problems. By making him complicit in lies and manipulation. That 10-year-old boy has been carrying the weight of your family's secrets for years, Carmen. He's been watching his father destroy himself while being told he had to keep quiet about it. Do you have any idea what that kind of pressure does to a child?" Carmen's face went white. "I was trying to hold our family together." "No, you were trying to maintain an image. There's a difference." I walked to my kitchen table and picked up a folder I'd been working on all week. Inside were printouts of information about addiction treatment programs, family counseling resources, and legal documents I'd had my attorney prepare. "This is what's going to happen," I said, handing Carmen a copy of the documents. "Bradley is going to enter a 90-day inpatient treatment program that I will pay for. Tyler is going to live with me during that time and attend school here in Cedar Falls. You will be allowed supervised visits with Tyler twice a week, but only if you're also participating in family counseling and a support program for families of addicts." Carmen stared at the papers in her hands, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been relief. "You can't just take my son away from me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not taking him away. I'm providing him with stability while his father gets the help he needs and you figure out how to be a mother who doesn't lie to and manipulate the people who love her child." "And what about our house? Our bills? I can't pay the mortgage without Bradley's income." I looked at this woman who had been willing to risk my life for money, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "That's not my problem, Carmen. You and Bradley created these debts through his addiction and your deception. Now you get to figure out how to deal with them." Carmen's mask finally slipped completely away, revealing the desperation underneath. Please. I made mistakes, I know that. But Tyler needs his mother, and I need help. We'll lose everything. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to manipulate a 72-year-old woman into unnecessary surgery." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. Carmen had gambled with my life and lost. Now she was facing the consequences. "Mom." Tyler's voice came from the stairway. He was sitting on the steps, having apparently been listening to our conversation. Carmen saw her son and immediately dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Tyler, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for any of this to happen." Tyler came down the stairs slowly and stood a few feet away from his mother, not quite within reach. The distance between them was heartbreaking. "Are you going to keep lying, Mom?" Tyler asked quietly. "No, baby. No more lies. I promise." Tyler looked at her for a long moment with those serious blue eyes that seemed to see everything. "Dad's lies hurt his body. Your lies hurt Grandma and me. I can't live with any more lies." Carmen sobbed harder, reaching out for her son, but Tyler stepped back slightly. "I love you, Mom, but I need you to get better too. Not just Dad." The wisdom of this child continued to amaze me. At 10 years old, he understood that addiction wasn't just about the person using drugs. it affected entire families, creating patterns of deception and manipulation that could be just as destructive as the substances themselves. Carmen looked up at me from where she knelt on my living room floor. What do I have to do? To prove that I can be better? To get my son back? I handed her another set of papers from my folder. Family counseling twice a week. A support group for families of addicts. A parenting class focused on honest communication. And you have to find a job and start dealing with your financial problems without any help from me. I haven't worked in 10 years. I don't have any marketable skills. Then you'll have to develop some. Tyler is going to be watching how you handle this, Carmen. He's going to be learning from your choices about what it means to take responsibility for your mistakes and work to make things right. Carmen looked at the papers in her hands, then at Tyler, then back at me. And if I do all of this? If I prove that I can be better? Then Tyler can decide for himself how much contact he wants with you. But Carmen, understand this. You will never again have unsupervised access to my grandson until he's old enough to protect himself from your manipulation. And if you ever lie to him again, if you try to use him as a pawn in any adult drama, I will fight for full custody and I will win. The threat hung in the air between us. Carmen knew I had the resources to follow through on it, and more importantly, she knew that Tyler's testimony about what he'd witnessed in their home would carry significant weight with any family court judge. Carmen stood up slowly, clutching the papers against her chest like a lifeline. Can I hug him goodbye? I looked at Tyler, letting him make the choice. He nodded slightly and stepped forward, allowing his mother to embrace him briefly. I'm going to get better, Tyler, Carmen whispered against his hair. I'm going to prove that I can be the mother you deserve. Tyler hugged her back, but I noticed he didn't promise anything in return. This child had learned to be cautious about promises from the adults in his life. After Carmen left, Tyler and I sat together on my front porch swing, watching the sun set over my garden. He was quiet for a long time, processing the conversation he'd witnessed. Grandma, he finally said, do you think Mom will really change? It was a hard question, because I genuinely didn't know the answer. Carmen had spent years building patterns of deception and manipulation. Whether she could break those patterns depended on whether she was truly ready to face the consequences of her choices. I think your mom loves you, I told him. But sometimes people who love us still make choices that hurt us. The question is whether they're willing to do the hard work of changing those patterns. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. What if she doesn't change? Then you'll still have me, and you'll still have your dad once he gets better, and you'll still have people who love you honestly. You don't have to fix your parents, Tyler. You just have to be a kid. That seemed to reassure him. We swung gently back and forth in comfortable silence until it was time for him to get ready for bed. Over the following weeks, I watched Carmen begin the difficult work of rebuilding her life. She found a part-time job at a local retail store, not glamorous work, but honest work that paid enough for her to rent a small apartment after losing the house to foreclosure. She attended her counseling sessions religiously and started going to support group meetings for families affected by addiction. More importantly, I watched the change in Tyler during their supervised visits. At first, he was guarded and careful around his mother, like he was waiting for her to slip back into old patterns of deception. But gradually, as Carmen proved that she was committed to honesty and taking responsibility for her choices, Tyler began to relax around her. The real test came 8 weeks into Bradley's treatment program. Carmen appeared at my door one evening, clearly agitated and fighting back tears. I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I understand if the answer is no. I invited her in, curious about what could have brought her to my door outside of her normal visitation schedule. The treatment center called, Carmen said, sitting on the edge of my couch like she was ready to bolt at any moment. Bradley's been struggling. He's talked about leaving the program several times, and they think he needs additional motivation to stay. My heart sank. I'd been afraid of this. Addiction recovery wasn't linear, and even people who genuinely wanted to get clean sometimes struggled with the difficulty of the process. What kind of motivation? I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was heading. They think it would help if he could see Tyler. Just for an hour, with supervision, to remind him what he's fighting for. It was a reasonable request, and normally I wouldn't have hesitated to support anything that might help Bradley succeed in treatment. But after everything that had happened, I found myself hesitant to make any decisions without careful consideration. What does Tyler think about this? I asked. Carmen's face brightened slightly. That's just it. I asked him first, before I came to you. He says he wants to see his dad, wants to tell him that he's proud of him for trying to get better. I studied Carmen's face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized her behavior before. Instead, I saw something different. A mother who had asked her child what he wanted instead of telling him what he should want. You asked Tyler what he thought before deciding what to ask me for, I said. Carmen nodded. That's one of the things I'm learning in counseling. That Tyler gets to have opinions about things that affect him, and that I should listen to those opinions instead of just assuming I know what's best. It was a small change, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Carmen approached parenting. Instead of protecting Tyler from difficult realities or using him to serve adult purposes, she was beginning to treat him as a person whose feelings and opinions mattered. If Tyler wants to see his father, then yes, I'll take him, I said. But Carmen, I need you to understand something. If this visit upsets Tyler, if Bradley says anything that makes Tyler feel responsible for his addiction or recovery, it will be the last visit until Bradley completes the program. Carmen nodded eagerly. I understand completely. Tyler's well-being comes first. Always. The visit to the treatment center was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Bradley looked healthier than he had in months. Clear-eyed, clean-shaven, with some of his natural color returning. But he also looked fragile, like someone who was working very hard to hold himself together. When he saw Tyler, Bradley started crying immediately. Hey, buddy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You look so grown up. Have you been taking good care of Grandma? Tyler nodded seriously. We take care of each other. Bradley looked at me over Tyler's head, his eyes filled with gratitude and something that might have been hope. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for taking care of him when I couldn't. What struck me most about that visit was how honest Bradley was with his son. He didn't make promises he might not be able to keep or try to minimize the seriousness of his addiction. Instead, he talked to Tyler about the hard work of recovery, about taking things one day at a time, about the importance of having people who loved you enough to tell you the truth. I'm learning that being a good dad means more than just loving you, Bradley told Tyler. It means making choices that keep you safe and happy, even when those choices are hard for me. Tyler listened carefully, then asked the question I'd been dreading. Dad, are you going to stay clean when you come home? Bradley was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the desire to give Tyler the reassurance he wanted. I'm going to try my hardest every single day, Bradley said finally. But Tyler, I need you to understand that my staying clean isn't your responsibility. If I mess up again, that's about my choices, not about whether you loved me enough or helped me enough. Your job is just to be a kid and let the grown-ups handle the grown-up problems. It was exactly what Tyler needed to hear, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild our family on a foundation of truth instead of lies. The drive home was quiet, but it was the comfortable quiet of people who had experienced something meaningful together. Tyler dozed in the passenger seat while I navigated the familiar highways back to Cedar Falls, thinking about how much our lives had changed in just 2 months. When we pulled into my driveway, Tyler woke up and looked at the house that had become his home. Grandma, he said, do you think we're going to be okay? All of us. I looked at this brave, wise boy who had saved us all with his courage to tell the truth. I think we're going to be more than okay, sweetheart. I think we're going to be honest with each other, and that's the best foundation any family can have. Tyler smiled, the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from him in months. I like living with you, Grandma. Even if Dad gets better and Mom gets better, can I still come stay with you sometimes? Tyler, I said, putting my arm around him as we walked toward the house, you'll always have a home with me. Always. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I truly believed that was a promise I could keep. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Tyler's favorite blueberry pancakes and marveling at how normal our life together had become. He sat at my table working on a summer reading assignment, his legs swinging from the chair that was still a little too tall for him, occasionally asking me questions about words he didn't understand. It was hard to believe that the scared, burdened child who had arrived at my door in March was the same boy who now filled my house with laughter and endless curiosity. Tyler had thrived in the stability and honesty of our household. His grades had improved dramatically, he'd made new friends at his school in Cedar Falls, and most importantly, he'd begun to act like a normal 10-year-old instead of a miniature adult carrying secrets too heavy for his small shoulders. Bradley was scheduled to complete his treatment program the following week. Over the past 3 months, I'd watched him transform during our weekly visits from a desperate, guilt-ridden addict to someone who was learning to take responsibility for his choices and their consequences. The process hadn't been smooth, there had been setbacks and moments of doubt, but he'd stuck with it, motivated partly by his love for Tyler and partly by his own recognition that he couldn't continue living the way he had been. Carmen's transformation had been slower but equally significant. The woman who had once been willing to manipulate me into unnecessary surgery was learning to navigate the world through honesty and direct communication. Her supervised visits with Tyler had gradually extended in length and frequency as she proved her commitment to change. She'd kept her job at the retail store, found a small but comfortable apartment, and most importantly, had begun to relate to Tyler as a person with his own thoughts and feelings rather than as an extension of her own needs. The doorbell rang just as I was flipping the last batch of pancakes. Tyler jumped up from his homework, always eager for visitors since our house had become a place where unexpected guests brought good news rather than crisis. It was Dr. Richardson, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and wearing the kind of smile that suggested he had something important to share. "Dr. Richardson!" Tyler exclaimed, throwing his arms around the man who had probably saved my life by listening to a 10-year-old's desperate revelation. "What are you doing here?" Dr. Richardson chuckled and ruffled Tyler's hair. "I was in the neighborhood, and I had some news I wanted to share with your grandmother." I invited him in for coffee and pancakes, curious about what could have brought him to Cedar Falls on a Saturday morning. Dr. Richardson said after Tyler had returned to his homework, "I wanted you to know that your kidney, the one you didn't donate to Bradley, it's found a home." I looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Remember Maria Santos, the woman who was on the transplant list ahead of Bradley? She's been waiting for a compatible donor for almost 2 years. When you offered to be a living donor, we ran all your compatibility tests against our entire waiting list, just in case things didn't work out with Bradley." My heart began to race. "And you're a perfect match for Maria. She's 28 years old, a teacher, mother of 2 young children. She's been on dialysis for 3 years due to a genetic condition, something she had no control over, no responsibility for. She's exactly the kind of candidate that transplant programs exist to help." I stared at Dr. Richardson, processing what he was telling me. "You want me to donate my kidney to a stranger?" "I want you to consider it. Maria's situation is desperate, and frankly, she's a much better candidate than Bradley would have been even if he'd been clean. She's healthy otherwise, she has strong family support, and she's committed to taking excellent care of a transplanted organ." Tyler looked up from his homework, having obviously been listening to our conversation. "Grandma, would this lady take good care of your kidney?" Dr. Richardson smiled at Tyler's direct question. "She absolutely would, Tyler. Maria understands what a gift she'd be receiving, and she's prepared to do everything necessary to protect it." I thought about Bradley lying in that hospital bed 3 months ago, his body failing from years of drug abuse. I thought about Carmen's plan to manipulate my post-surgical vulnerability. I thought about the betrayal and lies that had surrounded my original decision to donate. Then I thought about Maria Santos, a woman I'd never met who was facing kidney failure through no fault of her own. A mother who wanted to be healthy for her children, a teacher who wanted to continue contributing to her community, a person who would treasure the gift of my kidney instead of risking its destruction. "Tell me about her," I said. Dr. Richardson's face lit up. "Maria is extraordinary. She's continued teaching even while on dialysis, working her schedule around her treatment sessions. Her students love her. Several of them have even volunteered to be tested as potential donors, though none have been compatible. Her own family has been tested, but again, no matches." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Maria Santos was a petite woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing in front of a classroom decorated with colorful posters and student artwork. "She knows about your situation with Bradley," Dr. Richardson continued. "She knows that you were originally planning to donate to your son and that circumstances changed. She wants you to know that she would never take your kidney under false pretenses, and that she would spend the rest of her life honoring the gift you gave her." Tyler climbed out of his chair and came to stand beside me, looking at the photo of Maria on Dr. Richardson's phone. "She looks nice, Grandma. She looks like the kind of person who would say thank you and really mean it." Out of the mouths of babes. Tyler had summed up in one sentence what I'd been struggling to articulate. Maria Santos looked like someone who would receive my kidney as the precious gift it was, not as something she was entitled to or could manipulate me into giving. What would the timeline be? I asked. We could schedule the surgery for next month, if you're willing. Maria's condition is stable but declining, and every month we wait makes the surgery riskier for both of you. I looked at Tyler, this wise child who had already saved me once with his courage to tell the truth. What do you think, sweetheart? Tyler considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all important decisions. I think you should do it, Grandma. But not because you have to, and not because anyone is lying to you. You should do it because you want to help someone who really deserves help. The clarity of his reasoning astounded me. In 3 months of living with honest communication, Tyler had learned to distinguish between manipulation and genuine choice, between obligation and generosity. Dr. Richardson, I said, I'd like to meet Maria before I make a final decision. Of course. I was hoping you'd say that. She's actually here in Cedar Falls today, visiting her sister. She'd love to meet you if you're willing. An hour later, Maria Santos was sitting in my living room, holding my hands and crying tears of gratitude and hope. She was exactly as Dr. Richardson had described. Kind, genuine, grateful without being manipulative, honest about her situation and her needs. She told me about her children, 7-year-old Elena and 5-year-old Miguel, who had been watching their mother struggle with dialysis while trying to maintain her career and their family life. She talked about her students, many of whom came from challenging backgrounds and needed a teacher who was healthy and present and fully committed to their education. Most importantly, she was completely honest about what accepting my kidney would mean. She understood the risks I would be taking, the recovery I would face, the lifelong commitment she would be making to protect the organ I gave her. Mrs. Davidson, Maria said, her voice steady despite her tears, I can't promise you that nothing will ever go wrong. Organ transplants carry risks, and sometimes things happen that no one can predict or control. But I can promise you that if you give me your kidney, I will spend every day of the rest of my life taking care of it as if it were the most precious thing I've ever been given. Because it would be. Tyler, who had been listening from his perch on the arm of my chair, leaned over and whispered in my ear, She's telling the truth, Grandma. I can tell. And he was right. After months of living with lies and manipulation, the honesty in Maria's words was unmistakable. This was what genuine gratitude looked like, what real need sounded like, what authentic communication felt like. Maria, I said, I would be honored to give you my kidney. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. This time, there were no secrets, no hidden agendas, no last-minute revelations. Tyler helped me prepare, asking practical questions about my recovery and making lists of things he could do to help take care of me afterward. Carmen and Bradley, both now several months into their respective recovery processes, offered their support without trying to insert themselves into decisions that weren't theirs to make. The night before the surgery, Tyler crawled into bed beside me, something that had become our ritual whenever one of us was worried or scared. Grandma, he said, are you nervous? A little, I admitted. But it's a different kind of nervous than last time. This time I'm nervous because I'm doing something important, not because I'm being lied to. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. It feels different when you're choosing to help someone instead of being tricked into it. Even at 10 years old, Tyler understood the difference between manipulation and genuine choice, between obligation and love freely given. The surgery went perfectly. My kidney was successfully transplanted into Maria's body, where it began functioning immediately. My recovery was smooth and uncomplicated, aided by Tyler's devoted care and Maria's family's overwhelming gratitude. 6 weeks after the surgery, Maria brought her children to meet me. Elena and Miguel were shy at first, but Tyler quickly drew them into games in my garden, showing them how to plant seeds and water seedlings. Watching the 3 children play together while Maria and I sat on my porch swing, I realized that this was what redemption looked like. I had taken the betrayal and manipulation of my own family and transformed it into something beautiful. A genuine gift freely given to someone who truly needed and appreciated it. Instead of enabling addiction and dishonesty, I had saved a life and strengthened a family that was built on love and truth. Tyler, Maria called as the children ran through my garden, thank you for helping your grandmother make such a wise decision. Tyler grinned and gave her a thumbs up. That's what families do when they tell each other the truth. And in that moment, watching this child who had saved us all with his courage, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, honestly, with love that was freely given rather than manipulated or coerced. We had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and family truth. And that knowledge had set us all free. 2 years have passed since that terrible day when Tyler found the courage to stop my surgery and tell me the truth about his father's addiction. As I sit here in my garden on this crisp October morning, watching Tyler, now 12, help Maria's children plant tulip bulbs for next spring's bloom, I'm overwhelmed by how much our lives have changed. The kidney I gave to Maria continues to function perfectly. She sends me updates every few months, photos of her children at school events, stories about her classroom, results from her regular medical checkups showing that my kidney is thriving in its new home. Last month, she completed a marathon, something she'd always dreamed of doing but never could while on dialysis. She sent me a photo of herself crossing the finish line, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, Dorothy, for giving me my life back." But Maria wasn't the only one who got her life back that day. Bradley completed his 90-day treatment program and has been clean for 22 months now. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, a few close calls, and the ongoing challenge of rebuilding trust with everyone his addiction had hurt. But he stuck with it, attending daily meetings, working with a sponsor, and most importantly, learning to be completely honest with Tyler about his struggles. He found work as a bookkeeper for a small business in Cedar Rapids, a job that pays less than his previous position but allows him to live within his means and maintain his recovery. He rents a modest apartment and has slowly begun rebuilding his relationship with his son based on honesty rather than the promises and disappointments that had characterized their relationship before. Tyler spends every other weekend with Bradley now, and I've watched their bond grow stronger as it's become built on truth. Bradley doesn't try to be the fun dad who makes up for past failures with gifts and treats. Instead, he's learning to be the present dad who shows up consistently, keeps his promises, and treats Tyler like a person whose feelings and opinions matter. Carmen's transformation has been the most surprising of all. The woman who once seemed incapable of honest communication has become someone Tyler actually enjoys spending time with. She kept her job at the retail store and was eventually promoted to assistant manager. More importantly, she learned to approach parenting with humility instead of manipulation. She lives in a small apartment across town and has Tyler for dinner once a week and one weekend per month. Their relationship is still healing, but it's healing honestly. Carmen no longer tries to shield Tyler from age-appropriate realities or use him to meet her own emotional needs. Instead, she's learning to support him as he navigates the normal challenges of growing up. The change I'm most proud of, though, is in Tyler himself. The boy who once carried the weight of adult secrets on his small shoulders has become a confident, happy 12-year-old who understands that it's not his job to fix the adults in his life. He gets good grades, has close friendships, and has developed into an excellent gardener with an intuitive understanding of what plants need to thrive. He still lives with me most of the time, an arrangement that works well for all of us. Tyler gets the stability and consistency he needs, I get the joy of watching him grow up, and both Bradley and Carmen get the time they need to continue their own recovery processes without the pressure of full-time parenting. But perhaps the most important change has been in how our family communicates. We tell each other the truth now, even when it's difficult. We ask for help when we need it instead of hiding our problems. We respect each other's boundaries and choices instead of trying to manipulate outcomes. Last week, Tyler asked me a question that showed how much he's grown. "Grandma, do you ever regret not giving Dad your kidney?" It was a mature question that deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes I feel sad that your dad had to go through everything he went through to get help," I told him. "But no, I don't regret not giving him my kidney when he wasn't ready to take care of it. And I don't regret giving it to Maria, who was ready." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's fair. Dad had to learn to take care of himself before anyone else could help him." At 12, Tyler understands concepts about enabling and accountability that many adults never grasp. His early exposure to addiction and manipulation, traumatic as it was, has given him wisdom about relationships and responsibility that will serve him well throughout his life. This morning, as Tyler helps Elena and Miguel plant bulbs in my garden, I'm reminded of how much good can grow from even the most difficult circumstances. Those children are healthy and thriving because their mother received my kidney. Tyler is confident and honest because he found the courage to speak truth to power. Bradley is clean because he finally faced the consequences of his choices. Carmen is learning to be a better mother because she had to earn back Tyler's trust. And me? I'm living with purpose and joy that I never expected to experience again after Frank's death. Instead of being an isolated widow waiting for my life to end, I'm a grandmother raising a remarkable boy, an organ donor who saved a life, and a woman who learned that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the refusal to enable their self-destruction. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you've listened to every twist and turn of how my grandson's courage saved us all, then you understand what I want you to take away from this experience. The people who love us aren't always the people who are honest with us. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone else's lies, even when that refusal feels cruel or difficult. Tyler taught me that truth-telling is often an act of courage that requires us to risk disappointing or angering the people we love most. But that risk is worth taking, because relationships built on lies eventually crumble, while relationships built on honesty have the foundation to weather any storm. He also taught me that children often see situations more clearly than adults because they haven't yet learned to rationalize deception or excuse manipulation. When a 10-year-old tells you that something feels wrong, it's worth listening. Most importantly, Tyler showed me that saying no to helping someone in the wrong way creates space for helping them in the right way. If I had given Bradley my kidney while he was still using drugs, I would have enabled his continued self-destruction. By refusing to be manipulated, I forced him to face his addiction honestly, which ultimately saved his life more effectively than any organ transplant could have. The kidney I gave to Maria has given her 15 or 20 more healthy years with her children. The kidney I didn't give to Bradley forced him to confront his addiction and has potentially given him 40 more years of sobriety and honest relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to be used. As I watch Tyler laugh with Elena and Miguel, teaching them the same gardening lessons his great-grandfather Frank once taught me, I'm filled with gratitude for the unexpected ways that pain can transform into purpose, betrayal can become wisdom, and manipulation can be redeemed through truth. Tyler saved my life that day in the operating room, not just from unnecessary surgery, but from a pattern of enabling and manipulation that would have destroyed whatever time I had left. In return, I've tried to give him the gift of a childhood built on honesty and unconditional love. We've both learned that family loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. Real love sometimes requires us to let people face those consequences so they can learn and grow and change. If you've ever been manipulated by someone who claimed to love you, if you've ever been asked to sacrifice your well-being to enable someone else's destructive behavior, if you've ever wondered whether it's okay to say no to family members who are hurting themselves and others, then I hope Tyler's story gives you the courage to choose truth over enabling, honesty over manipulation, and genuine love over the kind of love that asks you to participate in lies. The truth may be difficult, but it's the only foundation on which healthy relationships can be built. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is trust a child who's trying to tell us that something is wrong. Tyler saved us all by refusing to keep a secret that was slowly killing his father and corrupting his family. 2 years later, we're all healthier, happier, and more honest because he found the courage to speak up when it mattered most. That's a legacy worth leaving, and a lesson worth sharing. Thank you for listening to our story. If it touched your heart or changed how you think about family loyalty and truth-telling, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that Tyler's courage is inspiring people all around the world to choose honesty over enabling, truth over manipulation, and genuine love over the kind that asks us to participate in our own destruction. Until next time, remember, the truth may be difficult, but it's the only soil in which real love can grow.